Let me know if you're looking for anything particular. You see right here? You can feel the scope. And then you exhale all at once, like this. Wow, check this out. We can do a shot with the path leading to the sea, just like on the movie poster. Usually, when you think of a road trip, you're alone on a highway, in the middle of a great American desert. That's your road trip in a nutshell. Loneliness in the world, it feels like you're so small, somewhere so vast. You're thinking, what am I doing right now on this earth? Ideas often come to me when I'm moving around, walking or on a train, a plane. It comes to me a lot faster watching the scenery passing outside. It stimulates the mind, I think. When you're on a hike, you look up the Mont Blanc, it's like, I'm never gonna walk with my two little legs, I'm never gonna make it up there. No way. And actually, when you're hiking, you learn that you can. You set one foot in front of the other, and that's it. And then you're on top, you're happy, you look down on the valley, and you can say, wow, we just did that with our little legs. Yeah, you did. I came into this business by chance, stumbled into it. I wasn't planning on it. At the time, I was sound designer originally. I was all fresh-faced. Someone came to me to do sounds on a video game, and I thought, yeah, why not? And that's how I did sound effects for what became Beyond Good and Evil. I was lucky to co-create Rabbids Go Home, and I started to switch roles a bit. And they let me, which was an awesome thing. They let me do something other than sound design at the time. And so, after that, one thing led to another. I traveled to Singapore for Assassin's Creed. I did all the naval combat, and I come back to France to find these drawings by Paul Tumulaire, who's an incredible artist based in Montpellier. And I told him, Paul, you have to do something with these drawings, especially the main character, Emile. And so that became Valiant Hearts, which also started from nothing. By the way, when you pour your heart into something, it might just work, you know. People will notice it, and that's awesome. That's another reason I was inspired to start my own really independent studio.
We created the studio with Johan in 2015, located in a business incubator, which is one of the main reasons we were able to get started. I'm not sure we would have been able to do it otherwise.
DigiXart was born to no longer have any creative limits, to get away from teams that became very, very large in the industry, the big name companies, and get back to almost artisan quality of games. There's about 15 of us, everyone's working on everything. That's what I miss the most.
At first, we were thinking that we needed projects that were manageable, and really nothing too ambitious. So we started working on a mobile game, which we completed in 9 months.
We started with a small game that was called Lost in Harmony, and after that I happened to meet with people from Aardman Studio during Games for Change festival in Paris, and we really clicked on our ideas, the way we work, our creativity, and many, many things in common. And that became a very big project. The standards were really high, because all of a sudden there was Aardman in Bristol, and we were here in Montpellier.
And so after this co-production, we decided we wanted to make our own game. Really developing the entire thing, including managing all the stuff that we had never done before on our previous console game, which is all the artwork and all the animation. So that's what we're doing with Road 96.
After we did Memories Retold, we started to come up with a bunch of different game projects, avoiding anything that had to do with war, trying to do something completely different. We have a shared document entitled Game Ideas, where we put all of our ideas, and 2 of them popped out. Bastion came up with the idea of a game that was about maritime islands. You could go from one island to another, and each one would be different, and we could generate every island based on what the player does. At the very beginning, I had this idea. It was a post-apocalyptic game where you have a kind of closed map with people who evolve and actually everything is generated as you go, which means the narration, all of it, and so I proposed this to Johan, and obviously the whole post-apocalyptic thing wasn't a good fit with what the studio was planning. I've personally been wanting to do a road trip for a long time because I love it in movies and I love it in books, and it's really a genre that's unseen in video games. It almost never happened. At first, Johan wasn't really feeling it because, of course, he's used to writing stories, things that have a structure from beginning to end, and so starting on something where creating the story isn't completely under your control, well, it's a challenge. So the road trip in this sense, it works great with our basic concept, which is the artificial intelligence and the narrative aspect. When you go on a road trip, you have to go really where the adventure takes you. You kind of get by with the people that you meet, and so that was a great match. Using an ellipsis is actually a weird thing in video games, and so we're bringing the ellipsis, just like a boat that's going from one island to the next. For us, it's going to be, I'm hitchhiking. So zip, that's an ellipsis. A new map. Where are you now? Bam! And we can drop you anywhere we want, so that's really nice. And the road trip thing's pretty wide. As a genre, it could accommodate all kinds of stories, but there are some common points with the imaginary of a road trip. First of all, connected in the landscape, with the vastness. Usually when you think of a road trip, you're standing alone on a highway and in the middle of a large desert, often in America. That's your road trip in a nutshell. And what's interesting behind that is the aspect of your loneliness in the world. And it feels like being so small in the vastness. And so the idea of being by yourself in your car or walking, you end up asking yourself all these questions that leads you to a self-reflection. What am I doing right now on Earth, here? Why am I not elsewhere? And on top of that, the movement, I'm a big believer in movement. Ideas usually come to me when I'm moving around, when I'm walking on a train, on a plane. It comes to me a lot faster. On a train, I'm watching the scenery pass outside and it stimulates the mind. Well, first of all, we had the idea of moving, so we started working on the structure. We were thinking something innovative, something non-linear, non-branching. But typically in a narrative game, ordinarily you start with a story at first, and then following the player's choices, we'll go into this or that branch like a tree. We didn't think that was great because everyone's starting in the same place, and we really wanted everything to be different for everyone, not at all deterministic. So that would be a completely different experience, even though they made the same choices, because there'd be chance in it. Road trip is about chance. Depending on who you meet, what's going to happen, who knows?
Qu'est-ce qui va m'arriver? Je ne sais pas du tout.
For Road 96, the artificial intelligence will use what we call the narrative context, basically to complete the story of the player, meaning how much money they have, what characters they've met, what stage of the adventure they are, which road did they take or avoid, did they give money to the hobo. Everything is taken into account, and the AI is going to use that context to decide we're opening up this path or we're closing that path, maybe we're going to open this storyline, so it's kind of like a deck of cards where each card corresponds to a situation.
Chaque carte correspond à une situation.
We mean a map in the three-dimensional sense, a complete map where the characters are going to live. There are 2 levels of complexity. First, which card are you going to draw? And then within this card, there are all these variables because depending on how you played previously, the rest of the story has to be consistent and tell a real story. Since we don't know the sequential order of the maps, and since the player won't necessarily be able to access the same resources in different maps, because some types of maps will have more health points, some will have fewer, and sometimes health comes from the narrative elements, that kind of thing. So we have to manage all of these elements to make sure that the player won't end up in a dead end, what's called a soft lock, where they can't do much because they don't have enough health, so the game is practically over. And on the other hand, trying to make sure it's not too easy and that there's a good balance between health and money. The goal being that we have a road trip-like management of your resource. At the beginning, we were a bit worried about inconsistencies actually. Our main concern was, are we going to be able to create a structured story, which leads up to an ending, which was very important to me. the ending having a finale, a really strong emotional release. And to build up to that, we can't be completely random. We can't leave it up to chance, like I'm doing this and I'm doing that. It doesn't build up intensity. The AI is going to choose, depending on the context, the best card to offer to the player, based on all kinds of constraints, such as, right, okay, they just hitchhike and they just really had an intense map, for instance. It was a car chase, and so we'll try to assess, maybe give them a card that is more laid back. It's going to rank the cards and pick the best one. Actually, each card exists in several versions, so any card could be daytime or nighttime, it could be closer to the desert or closer to the border, it could also happen at the very beginning of the game, in which case it will be a completely different context than the end, since there's this whole progression happening with the country that happens with the player as well. So you could say that all our cards can be decorated in various ways. We spent so much time working on the structure at that point that we didn't really know what story we wanted to tell, besides the whole road trip aspect that gives you a deeper perspective on some things. I'd left the door wide open to several scenarios, so little by little there were 3-4 possible game scenarios, all pretty different from one another, but they could fit in the constraints of the structure of our prototype. The first idea we had, so you were just a kid traveling to a festival, so you get on the road, maybe you're running away from home, but that's not explicit, and your only goal is to reach this festival on the other side of the country. It was François, one of our designers, who came up with the idea of maybe you're going for the border, maybe you're trying to flee the country, but at the time we had no idea why you're trying to flee.
The brigades are gonna help me reach the other side. When I get to the border, they'll send me a signal. And when I cross, if I cross, I'll share this with every foreign news outlet I can.
One pretty helpful moment was actually a trip to Poland to visit our friends at 11 Bits, an incredible indie studio that did This War of Mine and Frostpunk. Truly incredible people. And when we went there, we met them and introduced the project, saying, this is what we want to do. Pretty quickly, the conversation became a brainstorming session, and we weren't even pitching the game. Our goal wasn't to ask for help, for funding, or anything, but they immediately saw that there was one piece missing, which was, what is the story? And one of the ideas was to flee the country. It really was something deeper, kind of what you could find in Bury Me My Love, for instance, even though it was all text. I was really touched by that game, by that subject. It really resonated with me at the time, and the developers at 11 Bits, being from Poland, and many of them, the older ones on the team, they had lived through the Iron Curtain era and communism, and they could explain to me at length what it was like to live there, just be in there and try to flee, try to cross this infamous Iron Curtain to reach the western side. And I came back thinking, that's a lot deeper, to me, than any other idea we had. It makes a lot more sense in the game than the festival, for example, which is pretty trivial even on appearance. You're not going to risk your life, you're just going to a festival unless you're really hell-bent on getting there. But it makes a lot more sense in the context of someone trying to flee the country.
We were just 4 or 5 people for a good while. A pretty small team for the prototype. And that was nice because it was really innovative and really risky, and we weren't sure that the concept would work in the end. We have a game that's fortunately very varied, with all kinds of situations, but the flip side is that it's kind of hard to explain to others what the game's about, because the game actually generates itself, and pretty quickly we decided to make a text version of the game even before we had the 3D sceneries. We began with imaging, what characters we would meet, the scenes that would take place. So it became a text game with multiple choices, where you have some background, you arrive at a station, there's a hold-up, what do you do now? And you choose a few options. At the time, the game was a lot less forgiving, everything quickly turned to chaos, so we've cooled down a bit since. And we used that for playtests, so we invited people from the industry, very talented people, and they came to trial our proto-text, and it was kind of a funny thing. I was over their shoulders putting some life into the script. So this is a restaurant, and that's happening over there, and there's a kid playing in the arcade game here. What'd you do? Do you want to play with a kid? Do you want to buy a burger or something? And especially the question was, how'd you leave? Are you hitchhiking? Are you getting on a bus? Are you calling a taxi?
considering that you have this much money, you have this much health, right now you're tired and you haven't eaten, so this is going to happen. You're going to pass out, unfortunately, and on top of that, some guys are going to rob you since they found you while you were sleeping. So all allowed us to see that what works and actually what doesn't work too. I talk a lot about what worked out, but there's a bunch of stuff that didn't work out. We've removed tons of things, entire sequences, all for the good of the project. So it's really important to trim this off, kind of like a tree. The first time you trim your branches, you feel kind of weird. I don't want to hurt it, poor little tree, but then you realize, no, wow, the tree's even bigger. And if you hadn't trimmed it, maybe the lemons wouldn't be as big. And little by little, we started to create the real 3D maps. And then gradually, for a good part of pre-production, we had maps that weren't even rendered in 3D, and we were playing with them as text. So however you landed on a map that did have 3D, then you had a loading screen and you landed on the 3D map and you could play it in 3D. Then you choose to hitchhike and you get back to a map that's all text. At this point, we're working the Pixar way, on a different scale, obviously. But it's what Pixar call the ugly baby, a movie that's under construction. It's ugly, it's unfinished. And before it becomes a cute thing, a cute little baby, you need some time and you need some food. Same thing for a project. For a while, it doesn't look pretty.
Un projet, c'est pareil. Il y a toute une phase où il est pas beau.
Ouais, il était assez horrible en fait.
Yeah, it was actually pretty horrible. The desert, for instance, was just a big yellow flat surface that required a lot of mental projection, which we had as a team, as a studio. But for everyone else, it was really impossible to play.
Impossible à jouer pour n'importe qui.
We're in this sort of predicament because we have a skeleton for the game, but we need a graphical face too to sell it. But to hire graphic artists, you need money, and so we're stuck at that stage. Of course, not being able to push the graphics because we need a publisher, but then the publishers won't touch the game because we don't have graphics. I tried to find some funding at the time, but that was a false errand. I did a lot of legwork in vain. I realize now that I have perspective that wasn't going to work. It wasn't accessible.
I think that's a mistake we made, and we can learn from that in the future. We need to concentrate a lot more on what is appealing, what catches the eye, etc. Because what we had when we were looking for funding wasn't attractive enough.
I knew we needed that period of time of wondering, and I guess that I had faith that one day, if we did something great, someone might like it and fund the project. But I guess even I, after a while, I kind of lost that hope.
And so at that point we thought, if no one wants the game, that means it's not a viable project.
I remember even at the time we were wondering if the whole thing would fall apart. There was Johan at the back of the room grumbling, I don't even care, I'll do the game by myself if I have to. Even worse, that was the time when COVID-19 arrived, so it was really complicated. And we reached a point where we were almost over it. We were thinking, let's stop here, project cancelled. Well, we don't say cancelled, we just say on hold. We just suspend projects for a while and we move on to something else. Maybe in a few years we can get back to it. Who knows? And we thought we would just shut the studio. That was the end. We had a good run. We did 2 games. And then one day, I get a message on Twitter, someone gets in touch with me saying, hey, this is HP, we're trying to do video games some kind of way, and we'd like to see what you guys are up to.
Hi, is this DigiXart? Initially, it was sort of a fact-finding for what do people like him look for from a partner? So I reached out to Johan and DigiXart, having seen their work before, of course, historically, to get their perspective and their take. And Johan mentioned this amazing sounding game that he had on the burner, which actually, if you look at the inspiration list, it's literally everything I love. It's literally everything I love. Games-wise, films-wise, musically, art-wise, and I was like, oh my God, I have to figure out a way that we can help make this happen, and that sort of kick-started our conversation.
We managed to convince everybody on the many steps of the ladder at HP up to the big boss that it was important to make that game, that it had a reason to exist, and it carried these important values which we actually have in common with HP. Because even though they are now a hardware behemoth, they have this deep sense of values that the founders established at the very beginning, and they really wanted to carry this spirit forward, not to lose these values. And it turned out that we didn't pick a traditional publisher the way we had Bandai Namco before, or Ubisoft, or Focus Home, or all these well-known publishers. We said, you know what? We're going to work with a tech company that has never done a video game before.
Which is also what's exciting for us, right? Something new for us to help and do, and we had to figure out a natural, real fit as well. Johan had a lot of crazy ideas about also how to market the game and all of this, that we were like, okay, have the freedom. We have some ideas our side, but actually this is your IP, your game. We're supporting to help that happen. It's definitely not a traditional publisher relationship. It's really as much freedom for them as possible, but then finding points of collaboration, supporting them and helping the game get made, right? Financially, technologically, hardware-wise, but then otherwise it's how do we market this game together?
So that was awesome because it was the beginning of a collaboration that changed everything. It's funny because if you chart our progress on a curve, we had this prototype that prototyped these prototypes, and then, oh no, we're done, we're out of money, and on top of that there's COVID-19, we're all stuck at home mopping. We were like, this is the end of the world. I'm going to go back to being a developer, and now the arrival of HP means that the curve has totally changed. All of a sudden we thought, wow, voila, but now we have to make the game, for real, oh yeah. And this is where it gets pretty brutal, because we now need to hire people, we have to make the game. So we did the hiring. That's when Alicia and Tristan and the rest of the team came on to start producing the game. I met Johan during a game jam that was organized by Arte, and we ended up on the same team. We'd never met before, but we did a game together in 2 days, and for these 2 days we really clicked. And at the end he kind of told me that he had this project. He couldn't really talk about it, but he was hiring an artistic director for that project. What I liked the most about the project, and what convinced me to work on it, was the political subtext. There was this whole structure, the whole storyline, and all the characters already had their description sheets and basic design that was very defined. But what they were missing was a unifying look, the graphic style that was applied to all the characters in the game, since the whole thing was created in various waves. So some of the characters looked pretty cartoonish and others looked a lot more realistic, and we needed to pull it all together. We purposefully styled the characters, a lot more than the scenery, to emphasize their personality as people. We took some references from brutalist sculptures. It's a formal language that was really sheared, with a lot of facets. It's not quite low polygons, the way you can see it in some other games. But it's almost like you can feel these figures were pulled right out of the clay and carved with machete. So you can feel, for instance, the salient parts of their face. So that's where we applied most of the styling. And we also tried to enhance that with a little bit of realism, thanks to the realistic tools that were available in our engine.
Now let's take a moment to look at the latest candidate polls. Looks like Tyrak is still the preferred candidate. What a relief!
The game takes place in Petria, where the government uses a lot of propaganda with the whole population. Their president, Tarak, is really trying to install himself as a strongman in power, which we could portray in a graphical manner. We opted to show that by putting propaganda posters kind of everywhere and flood the player the same way dictators flood their populations with this propaganda, always idealizing the president-dictator. Now, how do we tell this story? How do we write the dialogue? Because up until now, everyone's been writing, all the designers, Tristan, Francois, so everyone had a hand in it. And Bastien set up this awesome real-time voice synthesizer thing that we could just write and press play and play the game with a robot voice saying the dialogue.
You're not gonna get sick, are ya? It's 3 in the goddamn morning. Put that fucking thing away before I come up there and shove it up your ass.
That way, immediately, you can tell we have the rhythm, this one is too long, there's a monologue here, great. So that worked out for us, but we're a bunch of Frenchies and we needed someone to really finalize the script and create some more depth in the characters, bring them to life. What I mean by that is these two are going to speak this way, this one's going to have that accent, and we found an American guy living in Montpellier. His name is Jan Riley, an amazing screenwriter who worked on a beautiful game called Crying Suns.
Maybe you guys could just design the level first and then I could follow that and just so I sort of learn or get a better sense of how exactly you want me to get out of the scene.
Okay. So the structure of the notes, I do it with the designer, and then we fill it with good dialogue and stuff. Okay.
At that point, Jan picked up the basics of the initial situations, and actually he didn't change them too much because he liked the way they were written. And so he kind of came up with a solution to keep the original jokes and the emotions that were in the scenes, which was great because he could just come to us and say, so this is happening here. I'd like to take it in this direction. How do we bring that up? And what can you do to develop something in the level design for the project to keep the scene together? He agreed to do what very few writers agree to do, which is to learn an app. Learn something with a really high learning curve. When you're not using a word processor at all, you're going to write in notes. You're going to use some threads with tons of conditions, and this is where you're going to write. When we designed the maps, we thought about which traits would fit which character. We already had some broad ideas, like Sonia would be a TV anchor, but we had no idea she'd play such a big role in the game. In the political developments, and in the propaganda in the game, it's something that came up on the fly, because we realized that the game was missing these connections between characters. At first, I wasn't very happy with Jared as a character. That was just a guy who killed people on the road. It wasn't very interesting for a character to just do that, and we already were thinking about that. Jared was perhaps seeking some kind of revenge against a character who was removed from the story. And so we decided to fold him back into the story and make sure that Jared had lost something, maybe because of Sonia or someone else. We thought perhaps of Stan and Mitch, the two yellow buddies. Maybe they have a family relationship, not to spoil the game, but they might have a relationship with another character that the player doesn't know at the beginning. Originally, there were a couple who robbed people to pay for the treatment of AIDS that one of them had, something that could have been pretty common in the 90s. And as we went on, we figured they should be linked with Sonia, wondering if they might have started their lives in similar places, but they didn't work out the same way. One of them has been thrown into the spotlight while the other two are stuck in the background. But in the end, they're still supporting each other, keeping in touch. But things might change. Since the events may happen in different sequences, in this case I meet Alex, for instance, this geeky hacker kid, but previously I had this bit of dialogue or that another character he's connected to, and if this happened, then he can't tell me that line, so obviously dialogue is programmed with a lot of ifs, a lot of what we call tags or flags in the game, which are notices. Let me test this, test that, moving, dialogue, skip, few lines. All of that is just a bit of a fun puzzle game with the scenario asking ourselves, how do these core characters and core situations link up? How do we create a coherent story out of that?
He wants me to check on the console.
Every time we had someone test the game, we were watching, and we were surprised by what's happening. And that's when you realize that the human brain is really great at making connections too. In this way, we put together the ingredients, we hope it all works, and the human brain makes the connections on top of that. With this and that, harping on tiny details sometimes, there was this awesome revelation we had once with a playtester in one of the scenes. She was sitting in the back of a car just looking around, so she zooms in and she notices this picture pinned to the dashboard, in the passenger seat. Another important character in the game, and at that moment she had this revelation of a very strong bond between the two characters. And it was a revelation for her, as strong as if in a movie we had written the scene where, ta-da, I'm your father. Except she generated the scene herself, looking at this picture, which was awesome. She had this whole emotional moment. It was awesome just to give up control to watch the game create itself. There are other characters too who aren't in the game now, and a whole setting that's no longer part of the story, but there was this psychic who was supposed to appear sometimes and give you some directions, let you know if you're good or bad, depending on your previous actions, and you would end up on a foggy road stumbling upon this little cabin with a chick predicting your future, advising you to change or else something bad will happen. Say if you behave horribly with this character, you'd end up finding Jared. And tough luck, because you don't want to find Jared.
T'as pas envie de tomber sur lui.
What did I say? Now, get in your filthy van and find me a light.
I think we have about 8,000 lines of dialogue, a little more than 8,000 at least for audio dialogue. That's the equivalent of 6 feature films. That's a lot, it's humongous. It's at this point you can get a bit overwhelmed and feel like running. Like, I'm not gonna be able to finish this game.
Yeah, there's a lot of non-playable characters in the game. There's 8 main characters, so that's already a lot. And then everyone else who plays a role in the story. The police, the people who give you food, people who are here to chat, to give you some backstory. So yeah, it's a lot of characters.
We started looking at libraries like Mixamo. It's a free library by Adobe, but we used that for prototype, but we were quickly limited in Mixamo. There's no animation for a character climbing on top of a limousine, for instance.
So we're using this XN suit for motion capture, which is not optical capture, so we don't need a lot of space. We don't need to have cameras up at all times in a studio. We actually don't even need a studio to be able to do it, which makes the technology really versatile. We recruited everyone to do the mocap, considering that if the same person does one character at all times, it would be more consistent. So I personally did a lot of the female characters. Zoe is all me, and I did stuff like throwing myself on the ground because I caught a bullet, or disco dancing. And there was a time when Tristan, who was just trying to work at his desk, Charles behind him was playing Jared, with a baseball bat in his hand, smashing the heck out of some pillows.
We were running down the hallways and people had all these questions. They were looking at us like, what is happening? I remember running around with this crowbar in my hand because I was doing motion capture for Mitch. And someone was standing at the end of the hallway looking at me like wide-eyed. What is he doing? What's happening?
The whole thing is not 100% accurate. So there's a lot of cleaning to do on the back end as an animator. By which I mean taking the raw data, then putting it into Maya, and cleaning up afterwards to make sure everything is working correctly. It's not magic or anything. You might think it's just gonna work fine without a cleanup. But no, no, no.
Are you a fan of dinosaurs? I won't get angry if you aren't. What? Good. Speaking of dinos, have you seen this movie that came out? Gigantic Park.
Maybe I should say Gigantic Park, or what do you think? Oh, okay. So it's okay?
Lean forward. I want to show you something.
Besides, we don't need the kids for this.
You're just some hairless teen. Hairless teen. Good one.
Voices are a big part of the game. Obviously, with a narrative game, there's a lot of dialogue, about 8,000 lines, and at this point, COVID was a big question mark. Ordinarily, we would have gone to the US to cast a big pool of actors, have a pretty large selection, and then record the voices in LA, where most of the actors are located. But at this point, there weren't any planes, there was nothing. It was impossible. So with Jan's help and the assistance of Audio Workshop, a studio here in Montpellier, they said we could find some English-speaking actors here in France.
Mieux qu'à Abbey Road, mieux qu'à Londres. Grâce au Covid, nous enregistrons ici.
Actually, we got quite a large cast, a lot of applications, and more than I thought. I had no idea there were so many English speakers living in France. Angela, the actress who voices Alex, she had never acted before. She works in a kindergarten, and she told us, yeah, but I really love to do this. Did a test with Angela, and it was a match. We found our Alex, for sure.
C'est lui, c'est sûr, c'est trop bien.
Don't you want to leave this country anyway? They made their choices, Mr. Yu. They put themselves in that position.
I hacked into Happy Taxi, because I can, and got some free ride vouchers.
There's a lot of preparation ahead of time, because we had to sort every line, figure out who is going to say what. Since it's a narrative game with multiple possible choices, the dialogues aren't necessarily following one another in a linear manner, so we needed to make it consistent for the actors.
Là, tu joues un autre teen qui a été mis en prison et qui va être transféré dans le camp de rééducation.
Managing all these branching nodes when it's time to record, that means knowing what line comes before or knowing what line comes after and without linearity. We had to put everything back in context, meaning this just happened, so you need us to use a different tone. That's a lot of work for the actor as well, changing from one situation to the other with a completely different level of intensity.
How is she feeling? Is she angry? Uh-huh! These brigades think they're gonna take me down?
And immediately the anxiety sets in. Did we do everything right? And what was great was that we were able to very quickly put the voices in the game. We didn't do all the voices at once. They were put in character by character. And the first time we had the voices, I remember it was John's voice. A point of the story where he's all alone in the grassland and he's drunk, stumbling through, and he's full of regret. And that's when he meets the player.
I'm a bad man, young wolf. You're looking at Patriot's most wanted criminal.
Well, she was young and committed, like me. We were in the brigades together. And beautiful. So goddamn beautiful.
And she's tough. Tougher than I'll ever be. But kind and funny too.
We had been working with the robot voices for 6 months, and the voice import was the turning point. It allowed me to say the game was awesome.
Et là, aujourd'hui, on enregistre Adi, c'est l'actrice qui fait Fanny. Elle est incroyable, c'est super. Elle a une voix qui colle complètement au visuel du personnage. C'est super.
We had a lot of questions regarding facial expressions, starting with, do we really need to have facial animation? Yep. So we tried a few solutions and eventually looked at the iPhone. So Apple have released this whole augmented reality tool suite called an AR kit. And one of these tools is specifically to detect various features on the face, such as your eyes, your mouth, your eyebrows, and, well, all of that.
And that way we just needed to plug in an iPhone, and we had a live link connected to an app. When you move, when you make faces, and the smiley does exactly the same thing. It's what they call the blend shape system, which, for instance, means the mouth will have this base shape, and blend with this shape, and this one. And the iPhone is going to capture this data and transcribe it to another model.
We
were really surprised of what high quality we could have with just the iPhone, because typically facial capture is really costly. But all we had to do was set up an iPhone below the actors when they recorded their lines, and we developed a tool that would timestamp the recording session and maintain the synchronization between the voices being recorded and the facial animation. Since everything went through our homemade tool on the back end, we could just integrate all the data into every map really quickly. There's one of the scenes in the game which I hold dear, and the day we received the soundtrack for this scene, music by Daniel Gad, which is wonderful and quite sad. And actually, the moment when we added the music to the scene, we had a real lightning strike. I mean, that you receive this really strong emotion, you get chills and you think to yourself, wow, we really have something special here.
Là, on a quelque chose de spécial, quoi. Tous les road movies ont des...
Every road movie has an incredible soundtrack, something diverse too. Having all kinds of music is part of the variety of a road trip, and so I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to have multiple composers for this game. I also wanted diversity because also our characters are very, very diverse, and I wanted each one to have a very specific musical palette, which would contribute to your understanding. So if you hear this sound, this music, even this synthesizer, you get the feeling that Stan and Mitch might be in the area, or Alex maybe, or someone else. Sometimes we drop a hint, just a note, a little bit of synth. It lets the player know that Jared might be in the area.
On parlait de Stranger Things tout à l'heure.
Johan is so attached to his games, all of his games, and there's often a personal story behind it, and I don't want to disappoint him. I wanted to get it right. I trust his influences, he trusts me, and we say, look, this one we could do better. He just sent me the picture of a girl on this side of a highway. It looked a bit like Death Valley or maybe Joshua Tree in California. Vast spaces, a mountain, a girl, a trombone strapped to her back. That's already a lot of info, so I thought, this is the road, okay, something like... You hop into the car and follow the feeling. The trombone was actually easy. I knew I had to write a trombone part. And I love to use brass instruments, but I'd never used a trombone by itself.
I've been kept inside so long. I've lost sight of right and wrong.
Back in the 90s, when we were teens, you either wore leather from the Metal Kids, the era of Metallica or Nirvana, or else you wore more a DJ kid with Daft Punk. You had these two big styles at the time. In pretty much all of my music, I try to instill some sense of nostalgia. It's something that nourishes me a lot. I know some people hate it because it's overwhelming. There's a lot of a negative feeling of melancholy attached to it, and melancholy is like nostalgia that turns sour. But I actually like nostalgia. On the contrary, it drives me. So I try to instill it in my soundtracks. It's a fictive place, of course, but it's the scenery that evoked the United States and California especially. That makes me very nostalgic because I've spent a lot of time in California, and it's the first thing I felt.
I hope this moment never ends. It feels so good out on the road and on my own, waking up. Strings attached now, looking back from ocean waves to desert skies and summer nights. I know the road is my home. The road.
Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the new Omen Presents program. We're going to talk about the game that was revealed as part of that, Road 96. Let's take a look.
Honey, is it you?
I'm pretty lucky because in my past life, I was able to make a lot of contacts to win some awards that also allowed me to get in touch with Jeff Keighley, for instance, the producer for the Game Awards in the United States, which is now the biggest award show in the world for video games. This year, 18 million people watched it. It's gigantic. So I could say, hey Jeff, could you show our game? That'd be nice. We knew that they wanted to announce the game around that time, and then he said it would be a big event, but we didn't know what kind of event until we learned it was the Game Awards, where we were really stunned. That was incredible. We had chills because of all of a sudden, that millions of people are seeing the trailer for the first time, and that time it exploded. Even our website literally exploded. We were offline for about 10 minutes. It was unfortunate. I was panicking because road96.com blew up immediately. I remember seeing messages from people saying, I was just doing the dishes during the commercial break of the Game Awards and I heard this dope music. So that was Toxic Avengers music in the background to the trailer. Wow, this is cool. What is this? It was really great to see all these people get hooked on the universe, on the story and the music too.
Ouais, ça a l'air stylé comme concept.
I could not believe it. I couldn't understand it. I don't know how we managed to get this. That's the magic of Johan, but I guess I had no idea how many people would see this. So many people, too many.
Yeah, it also adds a lot of pressure, especially in this world where players tend to claim the games for themselves, even before they come out. I think it's fair to say I'm always afraid of disappointing people.
There was definitely a before and after. Yeah, of course. All of a sudden the game, everyone hears about it because the Game Awards is a huge event.
Hey, ici DigiXart, studio indé du sud de la France. On est heureux de vous annoncer que notre nouveau jeu sortira sur Nintendo Switch.
Road 96 est un jeu narratif et procédural inspiré par les road movies des années 90.
Johan barged into my office next door saying, "Hey Alicia, I've got an opportunity for you. How'd you like to be on the Nintendo Indies?" Well, yeah, definitely.
It's funny because Alicia and I were writing the script. We were trying to figure out what we would wear to match the spirit, to fit the mood. It was important to me to feature the team because DigiXart is a very collaborative team. Really, the whole team is creating the game, the story, the characters, everything. Everything is in collaboration, so it's important to show not just always the same old thing, the face of DigiXart, which is often me. Come on, let the kids have their turn.
Place aux jeunes aussi.
I had to have a look at the YouTube comments. People seem to be interested in the game, even in our presentation. Most of the feedback was really positive.
To be honest, it was really reassuring because that means that we're making the right decisions, and it means that when we look back and compare with where we were a year and a half ago now, we know where this is going, and that's also very reassuring. We need a little bit of this validation, just people telling us, no worries, we're interested in your game.
Especially now when 10 million people have watched the video. It's incredible. I really wasn't expecting that many people to watch it. I've never had so many views on my LinkedIn.
The thing is now, it's difficult to find our footing because we know that there's some interest. Though right now we don't really understand who's interested, but it seems like it's pretty wide, mainstream, as they say. So we're looking outside the straight-up gamer demographics, so that would be awesome. That would be the ultimate goal, to have this conversation. This is very important to be able to reach out to everyone, not just the hardcore gamers.
Hardcore gamer.
We have 3 months to complete the game. That's... yeah, I'm a little stressed, of course. Stressed about release day, especially. We still have a lot of polishing to do, but the game runs great. The atmosphere is great. I really think that's important when you're developing a game. You can feel it when people are happy to make a game, happy to work on it, that they really want to make something fun.
We know that the game won't be perfect. We know that stuff's going to be missing. We hope that won't prevent players from getting into the storylines, having fun, enjoying what's already in the game. I don't think it will, because we're lucky to have a game that's charming. I'm eager to see people play it. When the game is out, I'm going to be spending the whole day on Twitch watching people test the game and getting their opinions.
Qui testent le jeu et avoir leur avis, quoi.
À quel point,
in the end, how close we'll consider the game to perfection, that's it's impossible to say, but we'll try to give it our all.
Tout ce qui est possible.
Honestly, to make an analogy with hiking in the mountains, now we've crossed over the pass. At first, obviously, when you're testing the game, you log a bunch of tasks and bugs, and so there's this thing happening like a statistical mountain. Mountains of bugs coming in, and little by little you get to this stage that's pretty concrete, actually, where you're fixing more bugs than you're logging, and we have crossed that pass now. And that's what happens when you do big projects. There's no sense in looking up at the size of the mountain and thinking, you'll never make it. You just need to carry on. And maybe you won't make it. That's life. You do it. And you hike down the mountain, no big deal. But most of the time, you actually make it.
Souvent, on y arrive en fait.
Hey everyone, we are playing Road 96 today.
Press any key. Let's see this game.
Alright, let's go. This is pretty neat, man.
This game is making me feel some type of way. Alex is awesome. That's my favorite character so far.
Oh my god, we were gonna catch up to this friggin' thing! We were gonna have a friggin' attack. We're gonna go into cardiac arrest.